Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Scott Daly, a constant reader, and I'm joined, as always, by the Richard to my Jack, constant whiner, Matt Freeman. Matt, what's wrong this time?
Oh, so many pages, Scott.
It was less pages than last week.
Oh, but it's such a long book, though.
Oh my god!
I can't even pretend. I love it. I love when it's a lot of pages because that's just more reading per week and less stopping and me having to go what. So.
Well, this week, part 8 of our 12-part series reading and discussing The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub continues. This week, war has come to the territory as Jack and Richard journey through the blasted lands and to the wolf outpost that awaits them on the other side. We are reading and discussing chapters 34 through 36 with a fun little interlude mixed in there. Matt, I gotta know, what did you think of this week's reading?
A lot. So this was a very interesting week of reading to me. I think maybe this was the most fun. This is kind of the most fantastical and surrealist, appropriately enough, given our discussion question from last week.
Yeah.
And one funny thing that happened this week is that I was like, I don't know, roughly halfway through the reading, and I was like, this is kind of funny. You got to admit that basically what we have is we have the quartet taking a train ride across a hellish blasted wasteland to their destination. What does this remind you of? Of course, this reminds you of, the middle part of the Dark Tower, Blaine, etc. Obviously.
I never made that connection.
Never made that connection. And I can't tell if you're serious, actually. And then and then the next thought I had was, wouldn't it be funny if like the next thing that happened was they got into a big gunfight with a bunch of robot wolves? And then my brain kind of stuttered to a stop and I realized we're going to get into a big gunfight, not with robot wolves, but with wolves.
I assumed you made that comment to me after you had read the part where they fight the wolves.
I had, but I made that comment to you when we were chatting earlier in reflection of a moment when I had legitimately had that thought earlier. So then that did happen. And so I don't think I'm just hand wavingly pointing out connections. I actually think that like Stephen King sees The Talisman as like a sort of rough draft or sketch of what became the Dark Tower, because there's so many of these plot movements that are mirrored in the Dark Tower. Like, yeah,
I mean, we've already talked about how similar Jake and Jack are as names, but also as characters, right? And the journeys they go through and the things they're struggling with, and that definitely is here for sure.
I think there's even some tones of like young Roland,
sure,
in terms of him becoming hardened and long suffering, and it's like what kind of a man is he going to turn into, because he's lost so much, he's been so beat up,
Yeah. The fascinating thing about this to me is I think you're right. I wonder how conscious King was in that, and because the Dark Tower was told over such a long period of time, like, was he aware when he decided, to bring to make wolves of the Calla and bring this giant battle with wolves in, was he remembering the Talisman, or was that just floating around in his brain and he didn't even think about it? And probably someone said to him later, "Hey, Steve, this is like, you've laid out a very similar path that happens in the Talisman for sure."
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a sort of grab bag of tropes and ideas that he just loves, mm-hmm. and so they find reuse in various places.
Yeah.
Like I really think he likes the cadre of gunmen have to go bring justice. I think that's a thing that he likes, and so
sure.
But I mean, I don't know. I don't think he'd be surprised if you were to ask him point blank, hey, did you kind of think of the Talisman as an outline for the Dark Tower? Like, I think he'd at least give an interesting answer. It wouldn't necessarily be like yes, but yeah. Anyway, and then of course the destination we're going to is called the Black Hotel, which it's black. It's a building.
It's a tower.
It's probably going to be tall. It's probably going to be a tall tower-like black building.
No, I think you're spot on here, and this is secretly a thing that I've been very with a lot of difficulty keeping from you as we've moved through the last few weeks, and I'm glad we're here now to where you can kind of see that general framework. And I think this is perfect because I think generally, like, I enjoy this book, but I think generally the Dark Tower overall is better storytelling, and so it does feel like, taking a lot of ideas that were drafted here and refining them down and tightening them up. And like, for example, I think the Katet's journey across their wastelands is one of the greatest moments in the Dark Tower series as a whole. The riddle contest, Blaine, all that stuff is great. And it's not like the Jack and Richard's journey across the Blasted Lands is boring or bad or anything. I just think it can't compare to what Roland and his Katet went through on their journey.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's funny because now that I see the similarities, I'm like groping for more things. Like we have the idea of, the boarding school and not Tull. Jesus, I'm having.
What are you grabbing for here?
The city, the
Lud?
Lud, yeah. I knew it was a monosyllable word. Lud, and like down to the detail of like the throbbing music playing through the ceiling being mirrored with the throbbing ZZ Top bass line, and like that being another kind of place that was like decaying and falling apart, and the our heroes being harried throughout the area and having to run. And again, it's like, are you finding legitimate connections, or is it just like these are things that show up in stories? I don't know. I think it's fun though.
I mean, I think it's a combination of conscious and subconscious connections, and also just this is the way King likes to write his stories, for sure. But no, I think it's great. I think it's fun, and I'm glad you're having fun making those connections.
I sure am.
All right, Matt, let's get into it. We begin this week with chapter 34, titled Anders. And of course, this is also the beginning of part 4 of this book, the final part of this book, aptly titled The Talisman. And this part begins with Jack and Richard right where we left them, flipping over into the territories as they sprint towards the train depot. We find out right now that they're safe. They've made it, and no one is following them so far. But Richard is still wailing in terror, a thing that we see repeated many times throughout the course of these chapters, for sure. And I'm curious, Matt, how are we feeling about Richard right now? I think we talked last week about how he had some steel underneath him, and we'll see maybe some more instances of that this week, but he's also really fucking annoying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was about tired of his act by this point. And I think the authors intelligently introduced the perfect solution, which was at some point soon to just have him pass out. And then he basically stays asleep for a big chunk of this week's reading, and then when he finally wakes up, he's much more tolerable. So I think there was an awareness of like how whiny and grating it was getting.
Sure, I think you need it, but also I think you're right that like having Jack having to deal with that as he moves through every beat of these few chapters would just get intolerable. And so you basically find a way to remove him from the equation by literally just having him pass out.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So Jack tries to figure out where exactly they are, and we get this line right here. A partial answer to that question came from inside him. It was certain and unquestionable, at least as far as it went. The outposts, Jacko. You're in the outposts now. Which, as we know from the interlude, where we were in Morgan Sloat's and Morgan of Orris's head, that is absolutely correct. That is what this place is called. So the question we have to ask ourselves, Matt, is where is this inside voice that is accurately labeling geography of the territories coming from?
I don't know. I mean, my first thought was that it's his Jason side. But it's like, how is that really that much of an explanation? Because like, the real Jason died when he was a baby. So why would he know the territory's geography? And then it's like, okay, well, maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's just his territory's side. You just keep it simple like that.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think the reason I pulled this, the reason I wanted to begin with this is I think the big theme, the big trend of this week's reading to me, amidst everything else that's happening, is this idea that there is some joining or combining of the Jack side and the Jason side. I mean, there are several moments throughout these chapters, and I've pointed out each of them as we go through our script this week, of specific references to the fact that Jack is feeling more like Jason, and kind of questioning how that works and what is actually happening and what does that mean. And it feels to me like this moment right here is kind of King and Straub planting that flag for us and saying, this is kind of the next movement of the story for this specific character and what is happening there. And we don't have an answer to that yet, but it feels very intentional in this moment to me.
Yeah, definitely the vibe that I get from all of that is that there is this part of him, there is his Jason side, and that part of him is very in tune with the territories, magically so, actually.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the territories are weird, man. It's weird stuff happens, and I mean, we got Richard is getting unnaturally sick here, which is a big thing we have to talk about. It's just some weird stuff.
Yeah, I was going to mention the idea that like Richard gets sick in the territories, Wolf got sick on Earth.
Yep.
Jason / Jack is the only person who seems to thrive in both places, and I think that's because he really is sort of uniquely special.
Yeah. So Jack looks around and sees some train tracks heading to the west, and I think this is worth talking about right now, because once we get on the train, things are going to be busy. And there's not going to be a lot of time for us to stop in the middle of an action sequence to talk about this stuff. But in this week's reading, Jack and Richard more or less journey the entire rest of the way to California, right? They get through the blasted lands, the equivalent of the American West, and are at least within smelling distance from the West Coast. I'm not sure who measures like ocean smell distance. Like, how far away from the ocean do you need to be to smell it? It could be lots of miles, right? I don't know. The point is, the majority of the journey is now done. And I think this is really interesting because we talked a couple weeks ago about how crazy it was that geographically our characters were still like in the middle of Illinois, which is a huge amount of distance from the West Coast. And you know, we were rapidly approaching what felt like the third portion of this book, and they still had a long way to go, and we basically hit the fast forward button on all this travel and just do it over the course of a day, basically 2 days.
Yeah.
Are you surprised, I guess, by the ramp up in travel here?
Yeah, I was surprised, although I guess it kind of makes sense and makes me think of, you know, the unfair joke of calling the interior of the US flyover country, because that is kind of what we do. We do kind of fly over it.
Sure.
And maybe just, you know, our authors didn't have a whole bunch of unique and interesting things to say about this part of the country. You know, to the extent that they say anything, they basically say, yeah, there's farming and then there's nuclear testing. And it's like, there's probably more, but whatever. But, you know, I think the most interesting part of the whole interpretation of what's going on in the middle of the country is the psychic scar left by the nuclear tests.
Yeah, I mean, the book doesn't ever come out and exactly say that definitively, right? There's just kind of this otherworldly hand waving at what is happening in the blasted lands. But I think that is a really interesting read of it, that, you know, we blew up all these bombs in the middle of the country and it fucked up the territories in some weird way that we don't fully understand.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cool idea because metaphysically speaking, you know, a hydrogen bomb is a horrifying thing. It's a weapon designed to kill a city. And so the kind of the metaphorical echo of that has got to be something, you know, especially since everything in the territories is exaggerated and condensed. The idea that you have like a roving fireball of death and pestilence, seems pretty correct to me.
Yeah, no, it's pretty great. For his part, Richard is absolutely refusing to believe in anything that's happening here. He's decided he's dreaming or delirious from the fever still. I particularly love this exchange here, Matt. I have a fever. It's the flu. There's been a lot of the flu going around. This is a delirium. You're guest starring in my delirium, Jack. Well, I'll send somebody around to the Delirium Actors Guild with my AFTRA card when I get the chance, Jack said. it's wonderful because it's such a specific Jack joke to make, right? Because I mean, remember, Jack was raised in Los Angeles. He is the son of an actress and a talent agent. Like the Screen Actors Guild and American American. I can't remember what AFTRA stands for. Film, Television, and Radio Association. I think that's what it is.
Sounds right to me.
It's the Actors Union. That would absolutely be something he would know about, right? And would be a big part of his life. So of course that's the thing he reaches for in this joke. It's just, I don't know, I love the specificity of it.
Yeah, me too. It also seems like Jack has gotten a lot more quippy ever since he's been hanging out with Richard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's something, I'll go ahead and jump to it now. I pointed it out in our final chapter. There's this really weird thing between Jack and Richard late in this book where he keeps calling him chum. And it annoys the shit out of Richard, and so Jack keeps doing it, and it becomes like this weird kind of in joke between the two of them. It's delightful and weird, and I just love it.
Yeah, I do too. I'm actually enjoying that aspect of the book. Is their quirky, realistic friendship, actually.
Mm-hmm. Because there's moments in this reading, especially when Richard is being the most annoying, where you might be asking yourself, why are these people friends? Like,
right.
Why? What was it about each other that ever appealed to each other? I can't see it. And then there's moments where that friendship comes through and you can see them play off each other. It's particularly in moments where Richard isn't being fucking annoying as shit and is actually like behaving like a human being, where that goes through. But I think those moments and that camaraderie and that stuff really, and the needling of Richard that Jack does in his sarcastic way really helps explain their bond. I like it.
Yeah, it gives you a sense that there's a lot of history between these boys, even though you kind of just met Richard.
Sure. So the two enter the depot building, and here they meet Anders, the man we heard about last week. He's a bearded old man who is convinced that they are working for Morgan and absolutely terrified of them. Jack manages to calm Anders down by showing him his coin, the coin given by Farron. And I love this moment where he looks at the coin as he's showing it to Anders, and it says, again, he was struck with the wonder by the similarity of that profile to the profile of his mother. Did they look that much alike at the beginning? Is it just that I see the similarities more as I think about them more? Or am I actually bringing them together somehow, making them one? And this is another of those moments, Matt, where I think the text is inviting us to talk about the melding of twinners between the territories and our world, right? And I think we could ask the same question about Jack, and we'll do that explicitly later, right? But it kind of forces us to reckon with the idea that maybe this is not something that's just happening by happenstance. Maybe Jack and his journey is specifically doing this and aligning the territories and our world in a way that it hasn't been.
Yeah, healing some kind of metaphysical injury.
Yeah.
My first thought along the lines of the coin and his mother's image is that, like, as he becomes more Jason, she becomes more his mother, because she is Jason's mother, and so he's becoming more like Jason. But I like this idea that it extends beyond just that, because it seems like some metaphysical injury was done to the universe when, I guess specifically when Morgan started monkeying about and murdering children, and that introduced this asymmetry where you've got two boys who are dead on one side but not on the other, and that doesn't seem like right somehow. Like it seems like if somebody has a twinner that like they should die when their twinner dies, and vice versa. And so something has been done that needs to be healed, and I think that's part of his quest here.
Sure. I mean, and I think that's great, because one of the things we have to admit here, 500 pages into the book, is that we know Jack is heading towards this black hotel to get this talisman. We don't know what it is,
right,
or what it does, or how it will heal his mother. Like these are things that the book has not even begun to tell us about.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that occurred to me when thinking about this is that Deloessian, her baby died. So like she's had a very different life than Jack's mom.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, maybe so I'm maybe jumping ahead a little bit here, but one of my thoughts was that it could be. So there was, I thought I remembered somebody in the book very early on, like maybe it was Speedy said this, said that the talisman was a person. I don't know if that's true, or maybe I'm misremembering. Whatever. In any case, that got the thought in my head, and so I was thinking, like, well, maybe the talisman is just Jack himself. Like the talisman is that Jack goes on this journey, and it's a transformative journey. And then, when he arrives at his destination, he has become Jason Jack. He has become more than what he was, and that's what the talisman is. He was wearing the ruby slippers all along, actually, to bring in a Yellow Brick Road reference there. So I don't know. We'll see. It's fun to be delightfully wrong if I'm wrong. So
yeah, no, I love all of this. Just so you know, I was not being silent because I didn't have anything to say. I was being silent because I was just enjoying you kind of ruminate on this stuff.
Yeah. Also, you were being silent because it was funny to hear me fail to remember the name of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that was, of course, part of it.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll definitely edit that long fumbling attempt out of this.
Thanks, buddy.
No problem. So, we see here, Matt, that Anders sees the coin and is immediately reverential to Jason, aka Jack, dropping to his knees, kissing Jack's feet, and repeating this phrase, all will be well, and all a manner of things will be well. So before we talk about that rabbit hole that I'm about to go down with that particular quote, Matt, we're just really lining up here the whole Jason Jesus thing, aren't we? The kissing of the feet. Of course, Jesus famously is the one doing the feet kissing, not the other way around. But I think it's perfect that Jack is appropriately annoyed at this kind of attention.
Yeah, of course. We think it's kind of funny, but it does remind us of this. This hasn't happened in a while. The most recent instance of this that I can think of is, of course, Farron, having a sort of hidden religious awe. Mm-hmm. This is the most kind of on the nose, explicit display of like, oh my God, it's really you that we've seen in a long time, if ever.
Yeah. And the coming of Jason means that we're good now. No stress. I don't got to worry anymore. Jason is here and everything's going to be okay.
Hakuna Matata.
Yeah. And that gets us to that line here. I love this. It's one of these fascinating things that you see whenever Stephen King and I guess Peter Straub in this instance start referencing other things, because Jack in his mind repeats the quote that Anders says, which all a manner of things will be well. Jack thought crazily, giggling as the old man kissed his toes through his sandals. I didn't know they read Robert Burns over here in the territories, but I guess they must. So I did some digging on this, Matt, and Jack is referencing a line called all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, which originally comes from the writings of Julian of Norwich, a 15th century British mystic. It was actually eventually put into a T.S. Eliot poem called Little Gidding, which you might recognize, you and our listeners, as one of the 4 quartets, and a poem that King used quite a bit in Insomnia, another season 2 book that we talked about. That line, old men ought to be explorers, which was the beginning of our second section of Insomnia, was from this very same poem.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I by the way, I can't find any reference to Robert Burns ever using this line, as Jack says here. Look, I've made mistakes before. Obviously, I remember when I told Stephen King he was wrong and used the wrong type of gun in a song, and then I just had looked up the wrong version of the song, and we still get emails about that to this day. So I'm going to say here that I could be wrong. I am not a Robert Burns scholar. I have not read all his work, and he could have used this same line, but nothing in my Google search came up with anything Robert Burns like in these lines. So I don't know if King and Straub are mistaken, or it's just Jack being wrong.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have Google back then, so it's probably easier to make these mistakes. Maybe one of them remembered it. And setting that aside, I'll take your word for it. I don't really have a dog in the fight, but it is interesting that T.S. Eliot keeps showing up. T.S. Eliot was all over the Dark Tower. Just seems to be really important to whatever headspace King goes into when he's thinking Dark Tower thoughts seems to involve a lot of T.S. Eliot.
I think you're absolutely right here. And I mean, I kind of, as I was going down the rabbit hole with this stuff, I actually stumbled upon, it was in a thing called Google Groups, but it was dated from 1996. So I don't even know where this thing came from originally. It looked like an email exchange, but I think it was literally just like proto message boards. And it was people having a conversation about books, and one of them asking Peter Straub himself a question about this particular quote. They were asking him, I've seen this, and King has used this again and again in some other books, including Insomnia, and some other books we haven't covered. Where does this come from? What's going on here? And Straub said in this conversation that what he said, what I just said, which it comes from the writings of Julian of Norwich, and it was something that he read in another novel that he was reading at about the time they were working on this book. He really liked it, and so Peter Straub, is the one that dropped it into the Talisman. King saw it, really liked it, and started putting it in his books as well, which is really interesting, right? Because you're talking about T.S. Eliot and how important he is to the Dark Tower. Is this the proto reason why T.S. Eliot becomes such an important part of Dark Tower? Because at this point, all he had written was The Gunslinger, which is not really specific to Eliot himself. The only poem reference we have at the beginning of The Gunslingers is to, of course, the Robert Browning poem. Which dominates the entire story, but it's not until books 2 and 3 especially, that T.S. Eliot starts really making an appearance. So I liked, not that King probably wasn't reading Eliot before this, but I like the idea that this idea came to him just by, Pete Straub just being like, "Hey, I like this quote. I'm going to toss it in this book here." And then Steve is like, "Oh, I really like that. Where's that from?" And then ends up using it in a bunch of his other books. And then T.S. Eliot becomes one of the poets for Dark Tower stuff.
Yeah, there we go. It's Peter Straub being powered by the Aslan the Lion Beam Guardian, providing his input into the multiverse. And everything comes from somewhere. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's also very interesting that the most prominent T.S. Eliot reference in the Dark Tower is the Wasteland, which is the part of the story that they're in now. They're about to go into the Blasted Lands.
Yeah.
So it like that feels like a resonant point there.
Sure.
It's really interesting.
No, it's fun stuff. I don't know how much it relates specifically to plot, but I found it really fascinating as I learned more and more about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also really have decided that it's not Straub and King being wrong about Robert Burns, that it's just Jack. Because honestly, before I started this research, one of the complaints, if you could call it that, I was going to have about this section is like, how the fuck does fucking little Jack Sawyer catch a Robert Burns poem reference from this random dude in the middle of nowhere? Like, no way. Like, sometimes I think King like makes all of his characters like some of the most novel and poem savvy people in existence, because he is so obsessed with storytelling and poetry and these things. So like all his characters always understand these things in a way that becomes completely unreasonable at times. So I like the Jack, knows poetry, but just was wrong here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a moderately literate person, and I don't really know who Robert Burns is or what Robert Burns wrote. So
just a poet. It's a poem.
So as you say, the idea that this, 14-year-old or whatever he is has a working knowledge of Scottish poets or whatever. I mean, it's fine. It's one of those affectations that I don't mind when literary people do it, because it's
I don't actually care. Yeah. Let's be clear that this is not a serious complaint about the artwork itself.
Yeah, they're writing for their audience, which is a bunch of nerds who read a lot of books. So.
100%. Yeah. It strikes me as how many things in these books at times like are written for people that must know the reference already, know? Like that one in particular. And like we've talked about this with King before, but the idea that he drops in all these references and like he never makes them necessarily central to the plot, but like if you get the reference, you like it more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that thing again that we've identified, that very dark tower thing, which I guess is a king thing in general.
Yeah. It never feels like gatekeeping, just like inviting you to appreciate art more.
Yep.
So finally, Jack is able to calm Anders down just enough to get him to explain some things. We learn that Morgan of Orris is lord of the outposts and built this train specifically to travel west with some cargo guns. He's arming some wolves. Anders is meant to leave in the morning with all the cargo and travel to somewhere called the Black Hotel, which is not ominous in the slightest.
Yeah. I again wonder if it's going to be, a tall, dark, tower-like hotel.
It could be.
But I mean, all joking aside, like, I wonder if on the level that where we're actually thinking of this as all being connected, is the Black Hotel actually going to be the Dark Tower, or if not literally the Dark Tower, then maybe some territories echo of the Dark Tower, some manifestation of the Dark Tower in the territories.
The territories version of the Rose, let's say.
Yeah. That's that makes more sense, but sure. Yeah.
Sure. So we get a little bit, Matt, history of the territories here. One big thing we learn is that the kind of the upheaval that is happening in the territories is relatively new. The what is happening in the Blasted Lands is relatively new, and we learned that civilization as it exists in the territories is most prevalent in the east, and then kind of dies out and spaces out as we go west, kind of like America, right? We were most industrialized and I don't want to say civilized because that's wrong, but just
well, the population clusters are definitely on the coasts.
Yeah. And then as we spread west, we kind of spaced out a little bit more. But we do learn that the evil that has gripped this world has come from the west and is slowly spreading back east. And we have to ask the question, okay, that evil is then Morgan Sloat? Could that be could it just be Morgan that's responsible for all of this badness that is him and his meddling in the territories because I think Jack kind of says that, right? That it just so happens to be the place from where I come from, where my father came from, where Morgan came from, as in their meddling is responsible for all of this.
Could very well be. We don't know why exactly Jack's father can go into the territories, so maybe there's some event that's sort of upstream of Morgan Sloat, some other thing that caused both Morgan Sloat and all of this, but it could very well just be, hey, this one really bad guy should never have been given access to the territories. And also like, we know that a lot of bad stuff happened in California, or at least that's my feeling at this point. California on Earth is like the origin of some badness, because Richard has these bad memories of California where he specifically doesn't want to go to California. Makes me I was wondering, where was Jack's dad killed actually? Was that in California? I'm not sure.
I believe so. I knew they were on a hunting trip, right? That was the story. I think they were on a hunting trip, but we don't know actually where they were on. I would assume out in California, yes. Anyway,
it's interesting to consider the idea, that California is like the distant and frightening west of west of the territories, which kind of lines up with how Richard feels about the territory, about California.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're right there. We also learn here that Morgan of Orris was the son of a joke of a lord that never really amounted to anything, and everyone just kind of teased off, but then suddenly he gains power and respect very, very suddenly. And this is fun because we can kind of, put two and two together here, right? That, the introduction of Morgan Sloat to the territories is what kind of lifted Morgan of Orris up into a non-jokey position.
Exactly. Yep.
And then we learn a little bit about our old friend Osmond and his son. We get this line. His son, Jack said. What did his son look like? Skinnies, Anders said slowly. One eye was afloat. That's all I can remember. My lord, the whipman's son was hard to see. The wolf seemed more afraid of him than his father, although the son carried no whip. They said he was dim. Dim? Jack mused. Yes, it's their word for one who is hard to see, no matter how hard you can look for that one. Invisibility is impossible, so the wolves say, but one can make himself dim if only he knows the trick of it. Most wolves do, and that's where this little horse son knew it too. So all I remember is how thin he was, and his floating eye, and then he was ugly as black, syphilitic sin. So I pulled this out specifically to remind you that the book The Eye of the Dragon came out this exact same year. And here we once again have a discussion of it's impossible to be truly invisible, but anyone can learn how to be dim.
Yep, that's great. And then we have the idea of dimness appearing in a couple of other books, and then of course Walter O'Dim. So
yep.
Yes, it's fun. It's a fun little callback.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll meet this son of Osmond here in a couple chapters, and he's not normal.
Yeah.
Beyond the dimness, there's some weird shit going on here. But that will be discussed in a couple minutes, because after hearing the story, Jack decides that Anders will not be the one taking the train to the west, that he and Richard will be doing it, and our chapter ends on everyone going, wait, what? Even though I think we, the reader, kind of realized that right away. This train is a perfect solution to his I have to go west problem.
Yes, I think Richard is the only one surprised.
Yeah. And then we cut over to another interlude, Matt. This is Interlude Sloat in This World 4. This one sees Morgan Sloat at Lily Sawyer's bedside, taking pleasure in her wasting away. And before we get into the content of this, I just wanted to talk to you about these interludes, because there's really no rhyme or reason to their placement so far. You know, I mean, like, there's not any kind of set structure to this where, you know, we get to the end of a part and we have another interlude. That is not the way it works. We've had them kind of just thrown in the middle. This one comes one chapter into part 4 of this book. It's just, here's another interlude suddenly. Why do you think King and Straub need this? Obviously they're serving a purpose, right? And they're breaking away from the structure of the book, which is basically Jack-centric. Why do you think King and Straub needed this interlude at this moment?
I don't know specifically. I mean, one interesting thing is that we're showing Morgan is all the way back at the start of Jack's journey. He's not hot on Jack's heel. He's literally all the way back where we started the story, right? Mm-hmm. It's and the last we saw of him, he was at the literal place where they are, but just a little bit forward in time. So it's maybe it's supposed to anchor us in terms of time and space and where he is, and that's going to be relevant in some sense. It makes him seem more threatening to realize oh, he traveled the entire distance of Jack's journey in a paragraph, from our perspective.
Sure.
Makes him seem more formidable relative to Jack, who's been struggling to make any headway at all.
Sure.
Structurally, the only thing I can think of is they want to establish the idea that we could switch to an interlude at any moment, because that can be convenient to do. We want to have an interlude here, so we can. And so they just make a habit of it, basically.
Yeah, and it's a way of getting information to the reader in a way that doesn't rely on sticking with Jack, right? It's kind of a cheat code in that, we need to give some information to the reader, but there's no reason Jack should be getting this information right now. And so we can kind of break with our structural conceit of our story, which is this close third person, and we can just hop over to someone else for a little bit. And I mean, I do think, we'll get into it, but there is information, important information given to us in this little chapter here. So we do. I mean, I think it's wrong to say we need it, because we don't really understand why we need it yet. But the book feels like we need this information at this time for sure.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So Morgan takes a break from berating poor Lily to head into the bathroom and take a couple bumps. And Matt, I want to talk about this because Morgan's cocaine habit is not something we've kind of talked head on before. But I think it's worth talking about a little bit here, I think, especially because in this chapter, we see Lily Sawyer directly confront Morgan about the habit. She notices he's doing it and gives him shit for it. And it's worth noting again, reminding our listeners that King himself did have a cocaine habit amongst other addictions he was suffering from. In 1984, when this book was written, I think he was a few years removed from the forgetting that he wrote Cujo phase of his drug addiction. That book came out in 1981. but he wasn't sober yet either, right? His sobriety doesn't come until the very late 80s, early 90s. Yet we have here this disgusting evil character in this book being painted as specifically disgusting and evil because of this horrible habit he has, which our writer is possibly doing as he's writing this book, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And I'm not saying this happened, but because this book was written by two people, it introduces this dynamic where you kind of wonder to yourself, did Straub write this specifically to be like, hey, Steven, this thing you're doing is gross and bad for you? Like, maybe if I write this into the book we're working on together, you'll realize that. And I don't know how to confront you about this thing, but isn't it gross that this really evil man's doing this thing? Isn't that bad, Steve? Isn't that bad? And by the way, pure conjecture. I have no evidence that says that at all. And I think it's as equally likely that King was just pouring the guilt and, depression he was feeling about the fact that he has this habit and he knows he has this bad habit, and he was pouring that into his characters. I mean, he's done this before, right? He wrote Jack Torrance in the middle of being an alcoholic. There's precedent for King just doing this, but I don't know. It's just fun to kind of think about here.
Yeah. I love your conjecture, even if I don't necessarily think it's likely. I think it's fun to think about. I think King probably knew it was a destructive habit even when he was doing it, but he did it anyway.
Sure.
King has always been like split brained about substance abuse. Remember how he wrote Salem's Lot about the clearly alcoholic Ben Mears while somehow allegedly not realizing that he was an alcoholic, and then kind of maybe not even realizing that Ben Mears was an alcoholic, despite the fact that was a prominent feature of his character. So like, I think that our authors definitely...
You met Father Callahan with that last one, I'm guessing, right? You said Ben Mears twice.
No. Ben Mears was also not explicitly an alcoholic. I mean, I meant to say Ben Mears twice, but
okay.
Callahan is also an alcoholic. You're right about that. But the point being, like, I think that he struggles with these things like via his fiction. Like he won't let himself confront them with his waking mind, so he uses his Maturin mind to struggle with them.
Sure. I mean, one of the fun things about Ben Mears, and I think we talked about this at the time, is that not only is he obviously drinking way too much, but he has the perfect excuse and reasoning for it, right? And the book kind of paints this as absolutely okay, because he's gonna have 6 beers at dinner, but he always goes home and he always writes those pages, and that's something that Susan's father respects in him, right? So it's if the book is laying down King's justification for his habits to himself as he's writing the story.
Yeah,
it's like, I mean, I feel like I'm drinking a lot, but hey, I'm writing books, so
right. It's like he's an alcoholic, but he's a functional alcoholic.
Yeah, right.
And you're supposed to be like, oh, he's a functional alcoholic.
Well, then he's fine. Yeah. So I don't know. It occurred to me in a way that it hadn't before when I was like watching this disgusting human being, and the text really goes out of its way to show how disgusting Sloat is and how kind of gross it is that he's doing this thing. And like, I love the part where he like goes into the bathroom specifically to take these hits, and then like finishes up and then is thinking to himself and is like, yes, I'm doing so well. So on his way out of the bathroom, he just does it again. And it's like, you're clearly addicted to this shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Slow.
I also love this little line here. That lovely train he allowed himself to sink. That lovely, lovely train. I bet I'm prouder of it than I am of my own son. Which, fuck you, man. But also, Matt, can we just... The train kind of sucks.
It's
like,
yeah,
it works.
It's
this dinky little electric train that can not go past 30 miles an hour.
Yeah. It's a tiny train.
Yeah.
I'm almost like, what is the point of the train? Like, couldn't you just schlep these Uzis across the wasteland in a caravan? I mean, I guess not. I guess not. Like, I guess they probably tried that, they probably, but okay, stupid question time from Matt's stupid question corner. How did they build the railroad tracks in the first place?
They just laid them. Just laid those tracks.
Then why the fuck couldn't they transport Uzis across the desert?
Maybe thousands of wolves died while they were laying the tracks.
But I mean, so I was thinking there was some kind of magical synergy involved where like they didn't have to lay the tracks because of flipping energy.
Sure. So they built the tracks in our world and they magically were there. There's nothing in the book that says that that's what happened.
I don't think that can work. So I just am left confused about the train.
That's fair. What I love about the train is that it sucks. And I love that the actual character here, where Morgan Sloat says, I'm prouder of this than I am my own son. And then when his own son sees the train later, he goes, that looks like a cartoon train, which is just perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And then his son destroys it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Morgan is also in this moment thinking about Jack's quest. And we see our first little hint maybe about whatever the fuck the talisman is, because we get this moment here. But the drug reminded Sloat that in some ways he'd prefer Jack to make it to the dangerous warped little point Venuti. He'd even prefer Jack to survive his exposure to the Black Hotel, which was not merely boards and nails, bricks and stone, but was also somehow alive, because it was possible that he might walk out with a talisman in his thieving little hands. And if that were to happen, yes, if that absolutely wonderful event were to take place, all would indeed be well. So this is wonderful for many reasons. First of all, we have a callback to the line that Anders just made, right? All will be well, all will be well, all manner of things will be well. And in a creepy kind of simpatico moment, Morgan echoes that statement.
So, I mean, my take here is that whatever it is, Morgan's intending on stealing it from Jack after he retrieves it. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching here, but I almost feel like the idea that it would be in Jack's hands is an intentional misdirect, because I think it's a more of a metaphysical thing.
What I like about this sentence, and I'm not saying you're right or wrong here, but what I like about it is the specific text of the drug reminded Sloat that in some ways he preferred Jack to make like the drug reminded him that actually he'd like if Jack succeeded in everything he's doing, which seems like a bad thing to be relying on in your scheming, right? It's like, yes, the drug is reminding me that it's actually more brilliant if Jack gets every possible thing he wants, because then I can just take it from him. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Good plan, man. Just let your enemy succeed. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we see here that Lily, despite her weakening condition, gets a good spit in on Morgan's face, which I just treasured absolutely. And in return, he threatens her, but it's interesting that he doesn't kill her or have Morgan of Orris kill her. And like, I guess you could say that the textual reason for this is he needs her to sign the papers to hand over the control of the business to him instead of to Jack. But like, I don't know, like Lily's dying and he's speeding it along, right? Because one of the things we see is he's paying the hotel staff to stop the heat in the hotel room. So it's just freezing fucking cold in the hotel room. So he's like, but he's not taking a direct action himself, which we've seen Morgan Sloat has done like time and time again. He took out Tommy. He took out Phil Sawyer. He took out that annoying actor who, just because he asked to be in more roles, we learn here that he didn't kill him. He just put him in a coma forever, which is horrible and terrifying. But why is he not just off in this chick?
Yeah, I mean, it would look damn suspicious, I guess, if she were to just die now. But other than that, it feels like there's some other reason why he needs her alive. Like maybe the queen needs to remain alive for a bit longer for some reason, so he can't kill her yet.
I mean, if we've kind of been told that the only thing that's holding the territories together and not basically giving Morgan of Orris free reign to do whatever he wants in there is the existence of the queen, then it seems like we'd want to hurry that death along, but we're not doing that.
Yeah, it's almost like he either he can't or he doesn't want to. He's like waiting for some eventuality.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, we move on to our next chapter, chapter 35, The Blasted Lands. We are back with Jack and Richard deciding they're going to drive this train. Anders says it works on devils, but it's just batteries. And Jack just describes it as a big golf cart.
Oh, man. We haven't talked about Anders much, but he's a pretty lovable little addition to the story, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Muller does him with a delightful Scottish brogue.
That's great. But because of the structure of the book, where the placement of the interludes, we know, even when we meet him, we know that he's fucked, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
because
basically.
When we see him, before we even meet him, we see him asleep, drunk on the floor with Morgan of Orris standing over him, basically saying Osmond's going to come torture him to death to find out what he told the boys and what he knows. And so, like, we know this is not going to end well for Anders.
Yeah, probably. Although I'm a little bit dislodged in time there because, like, Osmond is about to have a really bad day, so maybe he doesn't have a chance to get to Anders.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The timeline is a little confusing because we there's this moment in the interlude where Morgan of Orris is sitting there, you know, after Jack and Richard have already left, right?
Right.
And is sitting there at the outpost, and he hears someone come and says, this must be Osmond. And then the chapter ends. This must be Osmond come to torture Anders. And then, of course, when Jack and Richard get to the end of the Blasted Lands and find themselves at the outpost there, the fort, whatever, Osmond is there. Right. So you kind of say, hold on, wait a minute. If the only way through the Blasted Lands is via this train, how he get there?
Right.
And the nice little escape here is that we don't actually ever see Osmond in that interlude. It's just Morgan of Orris saying, Osmond must be here. And it ends before we actually see him. So maybe the out is just, it wasn't really Osmond. He just thought it was. I don't know, because this is the other problem is at the end of this section, Morgan of Orris shows up on the other side of the Blasted Lands.
Yeah.
And we've been told that they can't travel, right?
Yeah.
That the flipping, it only works
exactly
where the other one is.
I keep having to correct myself along the lines that, like, the flipping doesn't work that way. They can't use it the way that Jack uses it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe they have some ability to cross the wasteland that doesn't extend to just like general travel anywhere.
Yeah. But we've also seen, Matt, sorry to throw another kink in this whole thing. We've also seen Morgan flip over into Morgan of Orris and do so in a way that did not would not be described as raping the world, right? Which is what it was described when he came through at the rest stop. And what is happening here at the end of the chapter.
Oh,
so you would say that, maybe this is the way he can get into the territories. Okay. But when Morgan Sloat explained that, he said it was just a coincidence that he and Morgan of Orris happened to be at the same place at the same time. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
I kind of feel like at least one of these instances somewhere was a mistake, because I think that the key that he has, my feeling is that the key that he has is a thing that lets him step bodily into the territories in a way that is different from the typical just you kind of close your eyes and you flip.
But when he does that in the rest stop, he turns into Morgan of Orris. We see him transform into Morgan of Orris.
He does, but that would enable him to that would explain the like travel thing. Would be that yes, he turns into Morgan of Orris, but Morgan of Orris teleports to wherever Sloat was trying to burrow through.
I think what we're doing right now is we're being Richard when we should be Jack. In that this doesn't have to make too much sense, but it did occur to me as I was trying to like piece together the timeline of this whole thing.
Yeah, well, I'm okay. Some of it I'm fine brushing off, but the idea that okay, like here's the thing: like distance and travel are a very important part of the story.
Sure.
So the idea that we're suddenly playing really fast and loose with the idea of like, these guys can literally just cross from New England to to California, Matt, like instantly. It's like, okay, how though? Like because if they can do that, then what does that mean? And if it's just a mistake, I guess fine. But it's like, well, that's a pretty big mistake, actually. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should just brush it off. Maybe somebody can explain to us what we're missing.
Or maybe the book will fill this in the future as well.
Yeah.
I'm not being coy here. I don't remember,
Okay.
and I probably have never paid enough attention to any of this for any of this to occur to me. But it's interesting.
It is interesting.
Okay, moving on. We move on to this part where once again, Richard, Matt, is being pretty fucking annoying, right? He's complaining. He's refusing to accept any of this stuff. But we do have this moment where Jack realizes something here. He realizes if it weren't for pig-headed, hypochondriacal, rational Richard, he would never have stumbled onto Sloat's choo-choo, and Sloat would have been able to use the devil things, weapons of some kind, surely, against him as soon as he got near the Black Hotel. For the hotel was the end of his quest. He was sure of that now. And all of that seemed to argue that Richard, as helpless and annoying as he now was going to be more important to his quest than Jack had ever imagined. The son of Sawyer and the son of Sloat. The son of Prince Philip Sawtell and the son of Morgan of Orris. For an instant, the world wheeled above Jack, and he snagged a second insight that Richard might just be essential to whatever he was going to have to do in the Black Hotel. And I love this because there is something just so fundamentally Dark Tower about the idea and the concept that these journeys always require, teammates, friends, a quartet, whatever you want to call it, even when that person on the surface feels like annoying and unnecessary.
Yeah. I mean, as we discussed before, both Richard and Wolf have been extremely unhelpful traveling companions.
Yeah.
In almost every way. Like, we loved Wolf. His innate purity kept us from being annoyed with him, but he objectively did almost nothing to help Jack, and you could argue he slowed Jack down quite significantly. Okay, so bracket. I think the point of the journey is actually the journey, the transformation of the journey, not the destination, which means the fact that Wolf was being a pain was the point of his presence on the journey. Like the transformation and growth of the characters is actually the point, not reaching the destination. Mm-hmm. Yes, this reminds me of another series of books featuring a Dark Tower that I could name. Anyway, back on main thread. Yes, here again, Jack's traveling companion is useless and annoying, not quartet in the expected way, not somebody who he relies on. But I think he's serving a different role, maybe like he's bringing out a different side of Jack. And as Jack says here, maybe he will be utterly, indispensable when they actually get to the Black Tower. Yeah.
I love that you pulled this out. This Wolf comparison is very apt, because I think there is a moment where the book invites you to make that comparison, right? I think when they're trying to get Richard on the train and he goes like full panic attack, Jack is like, this is exactly like Wolf trying to get him in a car, right? And I think this is important because, as you say, whenever you start having repetition and storytelling, it means something, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that the two companions that Jack has had on this journey have both been people that were at the onset completely useless to him, and actually, as you said, hindering in a lot of ways. That is significant because now we've got a trend here, right? Now we have two pieces of evidence, both doing the same thing in a different way, and we have to look at this as some intentional point here. Yep. And I don't think we can conclude on exactly what that point is until we know the exact way that Richard will be mattering to the story. But it's definitely something we need to pay attention to.
I agree.
Speaking of the Dark Tower, Matt, one thing about Anders we haven't touched on yet is his use of the phrase "do you ken," which I know is like not exclusive to the Dark Tower, but it is very much matching some Midworldian-esque language.
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically a Scottishism, but yeah, that the ken it obviously is the Midworldian version.
Mm-hmm. It's getting close. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting close.
Yeah, almost.
So before the two leave on their journey, they have one final meal with Anders, who we see here appears to share everything that he has food wise with the two men. I love this line here. He was more concerned about what the two of them were doing to Anders' presumably limited stock of food, but the old man kept nipping behind the counter where he or his father before him had installed a small wood-burning stove and returned with yet more food. Corn muffins, calf's foot jelly, things that look like chicken legs but tasted of what? Frankincense and myrrh? Flowers? The taste fairly exploded over his tongue, and he thought that he too might begin to drool. So again, with frankincense and myrrh, we're firmly in Jesus metaphor here, right?
Yeah.
Like this is one of the three wise men bringing gifts to Jason Christ.
Yeah.
But the thing that I was thinking about during this whole thing was Jack's concern about taking all of Andert's food supply, which they probably are doing, right? We're kind of told by Anders as he's recounting the history of the outpost that things are very, very bad there. And there is, a lot of wheat around, but not a lot of else, right? And his ability to harvest this is probably pretty limited. He's an old man.
Yeah.
And I think this ties to the fact that I think Anders knows that he's feeding these people the last of his food, because I think Anders kind of knows he's fucked.
Uh-huh.
And because of the structure of that interlude that we talked about, we know that he's fucked too. And I think he realizes that. And so he's like, might as well give these two the last of my food and set them on their way, make sure the God I worship is successful in his quest. And then I'll just sit down and die. Hooray.
Uh-huh. Yeah. He's sacrificing it all basically to make sure that our heroes have a chance to succeed.
Yeah.
If we're making more and more of these comparisons, then I would say that he kind of reminds me of Ted Brodigan, the guy who, he's supposed to do a job for the bad guys, but he instead throws in his lot with the good guys at great risk to himself.
Yeah, I also got feelings of River Crossing here as well. Where they met with the old people who gave them just heaps and heaps and heaps of food.
Yeah, that's a good connection. I knew I was missing one. I was reaching and I was like, it's kind of like Per Callahan, just in the sense that he's an old man who's helping them. But
sure.
I think that the River Crossing is another good example. There's always elderly people who are helpers in these books.
Yeah, definitely. The elderly are very, very helpful.
Yep.
Their long beards.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes time to finally leave, Richard goes into a full-blown panic attack. But there is something interesting in this panic, Matt, because there's something focused here. He specifically says, can't go there. We don't learn this week what Richard is talking about, but it seems like we've laid the seeds of something, right?
Yeah, something bad happened in California. I don't think it's just the territories stuff even. I think there's something beyond that. And, I don't know. I think this is a big central mystery, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think it probably has something to do with the importance of Richard, right? We're kind of having this idea of Richard is going to be important to me somehow, mixed together with Richard has some specific fear about the place that we're going. That seems oddly, related.
Right.
So the two begin their journey. And at first, it's not going so bad, Matt. I mean, sure, the trees are thinning out and there's these bent, weird things, and it sure smells like corruption and hellfire. But, what doesn't smell like corruption and hellfire? You know what I mean?
It's in my nostrils all the time. So
yeah. And I love this line here. They were safe. The dangers of the blasted lands were overrated, mainly literary. That is, of course, until Jack sees the giant irradiated balls of fire and all the animals that had once been dogs, but maybe not really dogs, chasing them, and all the movements out of the corner of his eyes at all times, and the man lizard things, and all the sandworms stalking him, and all of these things. I'm not even going to read it all, but I love the part in the book where it just stops and says, before Richard woke up late one afternoon, Jack saw, and then it lists like some of the most horrifying, terrifying creatures and things in history.
Yeah, I love that part. I adore the weirdness, the surreal, nightmarish blasted lands, and I love how much time we spend in them, just with weird giant alligator guys far away, in the distance, and heads looking over mountains at you, and but maybe they are, maybe they're not, and dog and things and snakes and worms, giant worm, just everything is. Oh, I just love it. Like, it reminds me of stuff like Fantastic Planet, where it's not that it reminds me of anything in Fantastic Planet, because the whole point of it is that it's unique and you haven't seen it anywhere else. But it reminds me of, in the sense of like, man, this just was just weird and trippy, and it's a specific feeling of just unhinged creativity that I really love.
Yeah. I love the animals drinking from the black pools. Animals with long teeth and human eyes, and forequarters like those of pigs, hindquarters like those of big cats. I mean, just close your eyes and try to imagine what that thing would look like.
I did when I was reading it. It was actually pretty hard.
It's wild. But yeah, I mean, it's monstrous and terrible. And this is something that's worth talking about, though, I think. Because one thing that happens to me, or I should say happened specifically to me, is I conflate the journey through the Blasted Lands with the fight at the end of it. And my brain, whenever I step far away from this book, just combines those two things together and makes it one thing that happened simultaneously. And so the thing I was most surprised on rereading the Blasted Land section this time was that nothing happens to them, really. I mean, those balls of fire never even get close to hitting them. The dogs are kind of always kept at bay. And there's only like one moment of one person trying to climb on the train. Jack shoots him, and it successfully keeps everyone else away. Were you surprised by kind of the lack of events in this moment?
I mean, it felt pretty stressful and hair raising at the time.
Sure.
As it was, like, I didn't feel like there was a lack of action. I think it was more, for me, the experience of it was more about tension and oppressive weirdness than it was like action. So it didn't, I don't know, occur to me at all that it was, they didn't really get attacked that much.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think this is where our two different ways of approaching this book produce different outcomes, right? Because I know that there's an action sequence coming up, and so I'm reading this section kind of waiting for it, and then when it doesn't happen, I'm just like, okay. But you don't know what's going to happen, and so the tension of the whole moment just works perfectly on you. I love that.
Yep, you're right.
The other thing that does happen here, though, Matt, is that Richard finally stops being a dumbass. He wakes up from a long nap and basically decides to admit to both himself and Jack that this can't be a dream. It has to be real. He doesn't really understand why it's happening, but he says it's time to stop fighting it, which all I can say is perfect timing, Peter and Stephen. Thank God.
Yeah. Such a relief, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wonder if they design it to be a relief, like because they know that you're like, oh my God, when is he going to come around? And then he does. You're like, oh, thank you. And then it's like, I don't know, this something about that gives you the like energy to go into the finale.
Yeah, I like that because, speaking of the tension that you felt as they were journeying through the Blasted Lands and not knowing what was going to happen, what thing they were going to see next, what was going to go on, this is a way of giving you a tiny little tension relief, right? Because one of the things Jack is worried about is, what am I going to do with this fucking Richard guy? And because that conflict is more or less resolved, we are allowed a little bit of relief of tension.
Yeah.
As we move into some of the most tense parts of the journey through the Blasted Lands.
Yeah, I will say that when Richard comes to, and then Jack's like, all right, thanks. Now you're going to be able to help me with this gunfight. And then Richard's like, I despise guns. You're like, are you fucking kidding me? So,
yeah.
But he's fine. He does fine.
He equips, though.
Yeah.
But with Richard finally playing on Team Jack risks slowing down the train and stopping it to go check out the cargo and see exactly what they're bringing out west. It's guns, of course. We see there are Uzis and bullets, and later we'll see some grenades too. And Richard also recognizes plastic explosive because he watches a lot of TV. So it's clear that Sloat was planning on arming his giant army of betrayer wolves to go to war. But what war?
Yeah, I again, Matt's stupid question corner. Pretty confused about the geography of what's going on here. Like they're sending the arsenal from the east part of the country to the west part of the country.
Correct.
The army of wolves is in the west. Is it correct to say that Morgan's power base is in the west? Then where is the big war supposed to happen? Are they shipping the guns west so that the wolves can fight a war in the west, or are the wolves going to like get the guns in the west and then train and then ride the train back east? Like where is the war supposed to happen?
I mean, I think a lot of this is specifically to stop Jack, right? Like that he knows where Jack is going to be. He's going to send a bunch of guns to his army to go to that same location and prevent him from getting in there and getting the talisman.
Okay.
Maybe he'll ship him back east after that. After he's taken care of Jack, he'll send him back east on his train.
Okay, yeah. All right, that actually makes sense.
I mean, the question is that is fair to ask is how did all those wolves get out there in the first place? I mean, one thing we should say here that there is this moment at the end of this chapter where Jack kind of reasons that, hey, maybe the reason we didn't really encounter anything but a couple lone people trying to get on the train is that everyone knows this is Morgan Sloat's train in the Blasted Lands, and they just leave it alone because they're afraid of him and afraid of the guns and afraid of all these things. So maybe the Blasted Lands aren't as bad specifically for Sloat and his people.
Because they're a worse kind of evil.
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe so.
One interesting thing to note here, though, Matt, is that Richard is getting legitimately sick. We talked about this before. And this probably is not a psychosomatic illness like the one before was. There are sores on his face, and his stomach seems to be legitimately feeling bad. The color we see is draining out of his skin. It's really hard to not compare this to Wolf, who seemed to be going through the same thing in our world, right?
Yeah, I agree. Seems like Jack/Jason is the only one who can live comfortably in both worlds, because it happened to Wolf, happened to Richard, happened to
Morgan.
Even happened to Morgan, yeah. And he didn't even physically cross over the way these guys did.
Yeah. So earlier I said that it was an almost completely uneventful trip across the Blasted Lands, but of course we do get this moment where someone charges at the train, Matt, and Jack shoots his head off. First taking his arm off and then his head. I think my favorite part in this week's whole reading is when Richard is like, "You shot his hand off. How did you do that?" And he shrugs and goes, "I just pretended like I was someone who knew how to aim." Which is the most ridiculous thing to say in the world. And yet it worked.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you think, is Jack a gunslinger? He must be. Yeah. I've never fired an Uzi, but I've fired enough guns to know that firing an Uzi is probably really hard.
Yeah.
Because of everything about them being really inconvenient. So it is actually, I don't know if, the two authors of this book are familiar with, firearms to that degree, but that extra wrinkle of me knowing what an Uzi is, I was like, there's gotta be some like magic that lets him use guns better or something. Cause he's just, he's real good. He's real good with these machine guns. Just kind of.
You really hate it when characters can irrationally are good at guns.
This is the thing.
It's really your bugaboo.
This is just a Texan thing. I think is that actually there's, it's funny. I think that Jack also refers to magazines as clips in this chapter, which is something where I don't actually care, but I'm aware that that's a thing where gun people will just go insane if you refer to the thing that holds the bullets as the clip. But anyway,
I could have just, there's like a list of 17,000 things I care about more than that.
I know, me too, but I have these things in my head, so now you have to hear about them.
I'm sorry. That's terrible.
Anyway, it's, I mean, I think the reason why it's an Uzi fundamentally is that Uzis are cool. And so we want to have Uzis here because it's awesome.
I mean, Uzis are cool. They also strike me as like the kind of gun a Richard Sloat type would think would be the best possible gun to get for his army. because he's watched a lot of movies.
That's true. I feel like the death knell for the Uzi in films was the scene in True Lies when she drops the Uzi and it tumbles down the stairs and it kills like 15 terrorists by itself.
Because you just couldn't do better than that. So why even put them in your movies?
Exactly. It's yeah, exactly. Like any other scene involving Uzis is not going to be this good. So yeah,
that was amazing. Yeah. What a movie.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, let's move on to our final chapter of the evening, chapter 36, Jack and Richard Go to War, in which Jack and Richard go to war. We begin this chapter with them stockpiling ammunition. They're leaving the blasted lands behind, but Jack still thinks they're going to have a fight on their hands. And I love this moment here where Richard is kind of realizing that they're about to be in a battle. And if Jack dies, what do I do? Like, if something gets you and kills you, what happens to me? Richard sobbed. How would I ever get out of this place? I don't know, Jack thought. I really don't know.
Yeah. Is this the scene?
I like that he doesn't say that. He doesn't respond to him here.
Well, there's a lot of like shielding Richard from the seriousness of the situation that Jack does, even after Richard has kind of come around. Is this the part where Richard is just like sobbing like a child?
Yes.
Because that, for whatever reason, like that wasn't annoying to me because it's like, okay, he's actually trying to help, but he's just terrified. And you know, in that moment he had my empathy, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, it really sucks being him for sure. I mean, this is a completely overwhelming, insane thing that he's been thrust into without his consent, really. You know?
Right? Yeah.
I do like the moment near the end of the chapter. I don't think I pulled it out to talk about specifically, where in the heat of battle, Jack drops Morgan's name, which he was very intentionally not saying, and Richard acts exactly like you would expect him to, right? Where he's like, what Morgan? Who? Which? Where?
Yeah. Right. What'd you say? Yeah. And he's like, we'll talk about it later. Talk about it later, man.
Sorry. Did you pull that? Sorry.
What? No. I just mean that.
He'll talk about it later. Yeah.
Jack is like, we'll talk about it later.
There's no time for this right now.
Yeah.
But of course, like, this is completely rocking to Richard's world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the train begins to roll through what is the territory's equivalent of Northern California, which we're told is very similar in look to the Northeast. Like, I think the specific saying is when you need to do like a New England scene, but you don't want to fly all the way over to New England, you just head to the coast of Northern California and it looks close enough. So there's this real sense of returning right back to where he left, isn't there? I mean, this was kind of set up from the beginning, right? That the hotel that he was in was the Alhambra Inn, and he was told he has to go to a hotel on the West Coast, which is the equivalent of that, the Black Hotel that we now know it's called. There's this duality, you know, happening constantly in this world, and now we have this duality of America.
Yeah, it's interesting to imagine that like California and New England are these mirrors of each other somehow.
Yeah, and how they will reflect upon the character in his the changes in him as he makes the last leg of that journey.
Yeah, sure.
And we get this part, Matt. This is kind of the explaining what's going on portion. Here's a story for you, Richie boy, and I'm very glad you're asleep so I don't have to tell it to you. Morgan knows I'm coming, and he's planning a surprise party. Only it's werewolves instead of naked girls who are going to jump out of the cake, and they're supposed to have Uzi machine guns and grenades as party favors. Well, we sort of hijacked his train, and we're running 10 or 12 hours ahead of schedule. But if we're heading into an encampment full of wolves waiting to catch their territory's choo-choo, and I think that's just what we're doing, we're going to need all the surprise we can get. I just love the way Jack writes here. This almost sounds... it does sound like a completely different person than the forlorn, sad boy of the first few chapters of this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's becoming more Jason-like here, you know, or just this is who Jack is now, you could say. I mean, I think both are basically the same thing because the idea of him turning into Jason is, of course, a metaphor for he is becoming a stronger, different person.
Yeah. I do love the detail here, though, that Jack knows he could just stop the train here, hop off, and then like circle around the wolf encampment and head on. So they wouldn't have to go headlong into a fight that they might not win. But it also means that he would leave all these big bad wolves around. So he does decide to just charge headlong into this encampment and hope that they're going to win.
Yeah. It's I gotta admit, I did not think that they would actually go through with the plan that is stated here. Like, it seems totally insane to just be like, yes, we're just gonna ride the train straight into the jaws of I guess it's not a trap because they don't know that they're coming, but jaws of a whole bunch of enemies, and we're just gonna shoot them, and we're gonna crash the train into them that we're on, and we're gonna win somehow.
And I love the moment. It's like, Richard's like, what if the train derails? And Jack's like, yeah.
Jack's like,
good point. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Before we get there, though, at the exterior guardhouse, they come across their first wolf. And to make sure we assuage any feelings of guilt we might have about the situation, we see that this wolf doesn't look like our wolf at all. The wolf's head looked dreadfully flattened, as if a great hand had scythed off a curve of the skull at the top. His face seemed to jut over his underslung jaw like a boulder teetering over a long drop. Even the present surprised joy on the face could not conceal its thick, brutal stupidity. Braided pigtails of hair hung from its cheeks. A scar in the shape of an X rode his forehead. This wolf does, however, say the phrase right here and now, Matt, which the first time I read the story, I always thought was like a specific our wolfism, and it was always really shocking to me to hear a bad wolf say it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're meant to very slightly identify this character with our wolf and think like, oh, it's kind of a shame. I kind of feel bad that Jack has to murder this wolf and a whole bunch of other wolves, because I mean, like we compared wolf to a dog a whole lot, and it's like yeah, he has all of the things that a dog has, which is like intrinsic like innocence and loyalty, but also he's an animal basically, and you know, these guys all seem somewhere on that same spectrum where it's like it's sad that these guys were you know, basically kidnapped by Morgan and turned into monsters, and that doesn't mean that you can do anything about it necessarily, but it is sad.
Yeah, and I mean, I think monsters is right, because isn't it interesting? They're all called wolves, right? But some of them are like goat-looking things like that. I mean, we see Elroy's here. Like, there's an alligator looking a weregator. Like, it seems like whatever happened to make them bad wolves has corrupted them in interesting ways. Yeah,
I think you're right.
They're still were creatures for sure, but they're not the werewolf that we saw in Wolf. Yeah,
I mean, Wolf. I just assumed that all wolves started out like wolf, and then maybe you're right, they get corrupted when they feast upon the herd. It's interesting. This just occurred to me, it's random, but like, it's funny that like they're all basically just like this for most of the month, and then in the full moon they all become like vastly more dangerous and effective when they go into their like horrifying monster mode.
Yeah.
So it's an army that becomes several times more effective at specific times of the cycle.
Yeah, that's true.
Interesting.
If only you had a way of planning around that, Morgan.
Indeed. If only we knew what phase of the moon it was right now in the story.
So Jack takes out this wolf easily, and then they do decide to smash right through that outpost gate. And I love this part, Matt, so much. Richard flicked the safety. Thuds, grunts, marching men, the creak of leather, yells, an inhuman laughing shriek that made Richard cringe. And yet, Jack saw a clear resolution in Richard's face that made Jack grin with pride. He means to stick by me, old rational Richard or not. He really means to stick by me. And that's what I mean when I say this boy's got steel, Matt. I mean, he's a pain in the ass, he's useless, but when the chips are down, he'll pick up that gun, flick the safety, and be there at his side. And Richard does work in this fight. He's not just useless.
Yeah, that's right. He does pull his weight here. Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. But I do hope that he's not going to be the Eddie Dean of this part of the story. And I hope that's not why you keep saying that he has steel, to make me form that connection in my mind.
Would that be something that I would do? I mean, really think about it. Would I do that?
Yeah.
But am I doing that?
I don't know.
Oh, this is fun. So the two smash through the gate as planned, and our battle begins with Jack screaming a war cry here. He opened his mouth and cried out for Uncle Tommy Woodbine run down in the street, for an unknown carter whipped to death in the muddy courtyard, for Ferd Janklow, for Wolf dead in Sunlight Gardener's filthy office, for his mother, but most of all he discovered for Queen Laura de Lothian, who was also his mother, and for the crime that was being carried out on the body of the territories. He cried out as Jason, and his voice was thunder. "Tear them up," Jack Sawyer / Jason de Lothian bellowed and opened fire on the left. So that's, the thing we set up at the very beginning of the episode, which is this kind of transformation is complete in this moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And by the way, Muller's voice went very Roland there for that line, which gave me big chills.
That's awesome. I love that. So the gunfight go how gunfights normally go in King's Dark Tower universe, right? Our good guys just fucking own shit. They catch the kind of stupid and mostly untrained wolves surprised, and in a matter of moments mow down almost all of them. I love the line. It's like all of Morgan's painfully hand-picked soldiers over the course of 5 years were mowed down instantly. Okay.
Right. It's actually incredibly satisfying. Like, I'm sure there's going to be more, twists and turns and setbacks, but it's nice to just have an unequivocal win.
Yeah. Yeah. And for his part, we said Richie pulls his weight, and he does. He throws a well-timed grenade at an alligator wolf thing, and it blows up both itself and the entry to the barracks that a bunch of the reinforcements are in.
Brilliant.
We do see here, Matt, that 4 wolves break for the exit of the outpost, fleeing from Jack's bullets, and yet Jack lets them go, right? He raised the Uzi, then lowered it again, knowing he would see them later, probably at the Black Hotel, knowing he was a fool. But fool or not, he was unable to just let them have it in the back.
Yeah, pity stayed his hand. He was not so eager to deal out death and judgment, etc.
So do you think this is going to pay off in a similar way to the Lord of the Rings quote you're making here, that
I'm butchering,
these wolves will matter?
Yeah, I think. I think we will see them again. I mean, I think very rarely in these books do we have he knew he would see them again later, and then we don't see them again later. So yeah, I think it will. I think.
But is it going to be like, it's good that you did this thing, or are they going to pull a Saving Private Ryan and go, "Ha! You thought you were doing the right thing, and now you're stabbed in the heart with a Nazi knife"?
I think it's going to be good because I mean, Stephen King loves that shit. He loves the Gollum thing where you show Gollum pity. Even if Gollum tries to kill you, it still backfires on Gollum. The pity, the grace only breeds more grace, and evil destroys itself. Like, that's, now I know that, Straub is involved, and maybe maybe his favorite scene in any movie is the Nazi stabbing the guy in the heart slowly. But King likes the thing that I just said. So,
man, talk about things that have scarred me for life. That shit right there. Because I'm a person who watched that movie and was legitimately like, Upham did the right thing. And he should feel
oh dear.
Oh.
And then and then he just shoots the guy at the end, and you're like,
yeah,
it's like the end, no moral. You're
I'm
like,
glad he learned an important lesson, which is to be brutal and terrible.
Yeah, and then like that's the last we see of him. It's not like he's like, oh, okay, he's gonna go home. And that's on his conscience. What
a great movie that fucked me up royally.
Yeah, totally.
So having killed enough of the trash mobs, the bosses of the encampment finally appear. Osmond, our old friend, the Elroy thing, and a new champion, Matt. Osmond / Sunlight Gardener's psychopathic son are here as well. And we get our first description of this kid, Matt. It was curdy white and skinny. One of its arms ended in a wormy tentacle that somehow reminded Jack of Osmond's whip. Its eyes, one of them adrift, were on different levels. Fat red sores covered its cheek. Some of its radiation sickness. Jason, I think Osmond boy might have gotten a little too close to one of those fireballs. But the rest of it, Jason, Jesus, what was its mother? In the name of all the worlds, what was its mother?
Yeah.
What was its mother?
Some kind of Todash thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Osmond boned a Lovecraft monster.
Yeah. Basically, I mean,
hey, Cthulhu, you want to go on a date?
I mean, Osmond / Sunlight is a fucked up dude. So who knows, man?
Probably thought he was boning God or something.
Yeah. Maybe that's.
Yeah. I didn't pull it out, but there is an interesting moment that I just remembered. As Osmond is kind of losing his shit, he starts quoting in Sunlight Gardener, right? Like I think he says like he goes back to like the all boys are wicked or something thing, which is just straight up Sunlight Gardener. Which is fascinating, right? It kind of maybe hints at a blurring of those two people as well.
Yeah, well, it could be that this is. I mean, this could be sunlight in his body. Even
I suppose that's true.
I don't actually know. I don't actually think that that's the case, frankly, but it could be.
Regardless, it's wild.
Yeah.
So the Elroy thing sprints towards Jack, sending him right back into the mind of that young boy assaulted by a scary man in the bathroom of a bar in Middle America. But Jack is not the same person anymore. Well, first of all, he's Jason. But in order to make that clear, we see him just effortlessly gun down Elroy as if he were nothing, right? He just pulls the trigger and just like blows up his chest with Uzi bullets. And I love that the text like takes time to note the significance of this thing, right? It says Jack is kind of shocked by it. And it says here, it was as if he had killed childhood's boogeyman. It's just a perfect way of demonstrating I am not that same kid. I am different now. Yeah.
That's so fun. I love it.
Hey, Matt, how do you pronounce this name?
Rule.
Is it just Rule?
I mean, he only said it a few times in the book, but I think it's just Rule.
Reuel. I guess that's Rule. Yeah. Rule, despite his father's objections, then charges the train next, and Richard, recognizing the boy from his school and trying to shoot him a couple times and realizing that's not working, starts to cower in terror. And this, Matt, is when Jack suddenly feels a hot object in his pocket, and he's happy to see it. It's Farron's coin, glowing and burning bright. He takes the coin out of his pocket, feels the power of it, and shoves it into Rule's head, doing what those bullets could not and killing him instantly. I guess we were kind of waiting for this moment, right? And we knew these were totems that had some significance. We were talking about that from the second we got them. But did this surprise you? When you first, because the book kind of slow rolls this, right? Where it's like he felt a pain or a heat on his leg. Honestly, the first time I read this, I was like, oh, he got shot and didn't realize it. Feels this heat on his leg.
For some reason, what I thought was happening is like the train was overheating because something had been hit and like the batteries were going to explode and his leg was like pressing. Anyway, it's not nonsense. But what's funny to me about all this is like Rule is like built up into a terrifying threat and then killed within the space of like 4 pages.
Yeah.
I just think it's like, this isn't even a complaint because like he actually is really creepy. And he's sort of been foreshadowed by the idea of like, oh, Sunlight has a son and he's just awful. But it's just funny how, you know, he's apparently like this bulletproof monstrosity who rushes them wildly like a maniac. And then it costs them one of their, you know, precious totems to take him down. I guess it's just surprising because normally when you do a thing like that, you spend more time building up the threat, you know?
Sure. But I recall, I remember Mordred. I mean, like this is, I feel like what King does.
This is Mordred. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there is always kind of an anticlimax in the bad guys. Yeah. Like it's just kind of the way it goes. And I think that's very deliberate. That's deliberately the way King writes. And I think the anticlimax here is the point that,
I like that
Jack has expanded beyond these things. He's not afraid of the Cthulhu monster. He just uses the power of light to defeat it. He's not afraid of his old boogeyman. Like I kind of wish we would get to see Smokey here as well, where he could just fucking punch Smokey Updike in the face and just move on.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's do it. Punch him.
Yeah. So that's Jack, you know, summoning the light and the goodness and defeating the bad guys.
Yeah, it reminds me of the you know, the Father Callahan scene, honestly.
Yeah.
But,
but better because fuck you, Father Callahan. Well, I'm just kidding.
What the fuck?
I don't know. I just felt like it.
No, it's great.
All right. And in that final moment, as they win the day, Jack hears the familiar noises of Morgan Sloat tearing his way into this world. We already talked about how we're not quite sure what sense that makes, but he does what anyone would do in that situation, which is say, oh, you're coming here? Well, I'm going to go over there. And he grabs Richard's hand and they flip back to our world and the chapter ends.
Sweet. That's some action, man. That's awesome.
So what do you think is going to happen next, Matt? So we've made it to, within nose distance from the ocean, at least in the territories. How far away from the Black Hotel are Jack and Richard when they flip back over?
I think there's got to be some more traveling.
Okay.
So they're not like right there. I think that they hit this outpost, but this outpost is not like the same place as their destination. So I think they probably, I don't really have any concrete guesses between where we are and where they have to end up.
Okay.
So it could be quick. It could be. I didn't even look at the next chapter title, so I don't know what we're heading into.
Do you want me to tell you?
Yeah, sure.
Well, shoot. I was expecting you to say no, and I didn't have it handy.
Well, the next chapter title, I don't have any way of figuring that out.
It is called Richard Remembers.
Okay, so Richard's gonna remember. I think Richard's gonna remember what happened in California. Is my theory. What happened in California, and why is it bad to go there?
What happened in California, Matt?
It's funny because I thought we'd already kind of done Richard's trauma, which was the time that he went into the territories and a monster grabbed him. But maybe he becomes more aware of how terrible his father is somehow. Like he remembers something awful that his father did.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fitting, right? In this moment where Jack kind of opened the door to, hey, Morgan is actually the big bad that we're all dealing with. That this would be the moment that Richard then comes to that realization of self.
Right.
I think that's a logical leap you're making there.
Yep.
But we will find out next week as we continue to make our way through the Talisman. Matt, we're almost done. We've got 3 more weeks of reading and then our overall discussion left. So we're getting near the end of this book.
Awesome.
All right, let's get into our discussion questions section. We got another great question with another essays worth of response. Last week, our discussion question section went on for an entire hour. We're going to try not to do that this week, but y'all have made it very difficult on us, which is a good thing, by the way. I'm not complaining.
We always say that, and then we spend a lot of time discussing your really great answers. But this time we're serious. Yeah, totally. So the discussion question was, what is your favorite scene of surrealist horror in storytelling? It's funny because we were thinking about the boarding school, but this week in the Blasted Lands is equally a great application of the idea of surrealist horror. So anyway,
you're right. That never occurred to me.
God damn it. All right. So first we have Pear Jane saying King's 1408 is still one of the scariest stories I've ever read. This is an odd endorsement, but the room uses the most terrifying non sequiturs in fiction to drive Mike mad. The passage that haunts me is when he picks up the old phone to dial the operator. As he put the handset of the phone against his ear, he heard a series of clicks as the dial spun back to its original position. It sounded like the Wheel of Fortune. Do you want to spin, or do you want to solve the puzzle? Remember that if you try to solve the puzzle and fail, you'll be put out into the snow beside the Connecticut Turnpike, and the wolves will eat you. There was no ring in his ear. Instead, a harsh voice simply began speaking. This is 9, 9. This is 9, 9. This is 10, 10. We have killed your friends. Every friend is now dead. This is 6, 6. The threats are bad enough, but those numbers, the voice identifying itself as a number, but it's changing the numbers. Why 10 to 6? Why any of it? It's possible the numbers make some sense to the voice, but it would be impossible to know because, as he goes on to say, there is something alien here. Most monsters are recognizable, but when they cross the line to truly alien, something so new and unfamiliar that it follows no rules that we understand, that's when the terror really strikes deep. How much truly new sensory information can our brains process before they shut down completely?
Great answer, Pear Jane. We just recently talked about 1408, the adaptation at least. And while I think the book is much more surreal in this regard than that film was, there's definitely some great surreal horror elements in that movie as well.
Yeah, I said that I would read the book, the short story. I never got around to it. I want to now, hearing that it has a slightly different spin on the idea. So thanks for pointing this out.
It really does. Do it, Matt. Do it.
I will.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, since someone else covered Lynch, I think I'll mention Darren Aronofsky. From his debut indie film Pi, about math and religion, to Mother, his bizarre take on the Bible, to the hallucinogenic alter egos in Black Swan, Aronofsky has very much embraced surrealism in his filmmaking. Requiem for a Dream is a deeply moving and profound film about the dangers of drug addiction. His use of body-mounted cameras serves to enhance the strangeness and frenetic energy of being high, experiencing hallucinations, and the feeling of terror and humiliation. I'll make particular note of Ellen Burstyn's refrigerator hallucinations, as her story is particularly tragic. The movie is so good, but equally painful to watch because of the visceral nature of the acting performances and camera work. Aronofsky is a perfect answer to this question in every movie, all of them.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking of a better visual storyteller who does, surreal horror. Yeah, perfect.
And I love Requiem for a Dream so much. It's so good.
Yeah, I've still never seen Mother. I'm embarrassed because I adore Aronofsky. I love Pi. I think Pi is brilliant.
Man, Mother. The less you know about it, the better.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I don't know when I'll fit that in, but I want to watch it.
One of the only movies in which my wife and I saw together, we walked out of, and she was just like, absolutely fucking not. And I was like, that's one of the best things I've ever seen.
That's great.
Which is, I think that's the best movies,
Yeah, get strong reactions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of reminds me of the way Pi ends, where it's like very a lot to discuss when you walk out of the theater.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Mother, and I'll be as broad as I can about this, is that it's meant to be, especially in some cases, uncomfortable and overwhelming, in that the way Aronofsky shoots it is you're such a tight, confined space, and there's tons of people around, and the camera keeps like sweeping and moving through them in an overwhelming way that just like can be completely overwhelming to your senses. And it wasn't that my wife was not enjoying the movie, which she didn't like love the concept of the movie, but it was like physically like
overwhelming,
just like overwhelming her senses to the point where she just wanted to leave the room.
Yeah.
And it's funny because ironically, someone responded to Sam's question here talking about a Gaspar Noé film called Climax, which is a movie I watched at a film festival, and that did to me what Mother did to my wife, where it is a movie designed, and I think it works as surrealist horror as well, because it's a movie that like it's designed to be like an LSD trip gone bad, and so it's just constant nonstop noise and flashing and spinning and overwhelming all your senses for an hour and a half. And I literally was like, I need this to end. Like at one point I just had to close my eyes because like this is too much. I'm overwhelmed. My brain cannot handle this.
Yeah, I admit that kind of thing isn't my favorite. Like I like this. I like the horror that's more subtle.
Sure.
It can be visually arresting, but not like, giving you an epileptic fit.
Yeah, and I remember walking out of that movie with my friends and them just being like, that was great. And me being just like, I need a break.
Yeah. It's gonna get a drink of water and splash it on my face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mother, a Financial Profit 584 says, for me, it's the last 30 minutes of Mother. That baby scene still haunts me.
Oh man, I'm just going to leave that as a tantalizing preview for you, Matt.
Fantastic.
Watch that movie. Oh, you need to watch it just so we can talk about it. Okay. It's such a wild fucking film.
Okay.
Next up, we have Belwas Deserves Better, who says, I didn't want to overthink things to try to nail down a definition for surreal horror. So I just thought, what is a scene that is both surreal and horrifying? Instantly, the boat ride scene from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory came to mind. Following the possible drowning of a child, Willy Wonka and his guests, hostages, victims, continue down the diarrhea river on a whimsical colored paddle boat when suddenly the tone jarringly shifts from saccharine crazy to batshit crazy. The audience and the characters are bombarded by a kaleidoscope of increasingly disturbing images, accompanied by discordant music and a very unsettling monologue from Wonka about how he probably brought them all there to die. Then it ends as abruptly as it began. I still remember being utterly shocked and terrified seeing this for the first time as a child. The scene is surreal not just in the imagery, but also its very premise. It's like this film, which is ostensibly for children, goes completely toe-dash for about 2 minutes, and then right back as if it never happened. 1970s cinema is pretty wild, to say the least.
I feel like this is why the movie's so beloved, is it's willing to do weird... toe-dash is the perfect idea, because you're like, what is happening in that scene? Like, you could really do an analysis. You're like, did they go somewhere? Are they like toe-dash is a perfectly good explanation, because they're like in this like space between spaces as they travel through the you get the sense that like the factory actually exists in another dimension, like in that movie. I know this is not like textual, but it feels like the factory is in a whole different, universe from the rest of the real world.
Oh yeah. The way they shoot it, it's like they've teleported somewhere else. Yeah, for sure.
I think they have.
What? God, yeah. The 70s were wild, man.
We
don't make shit like this anymore.
They also have to like fight aliens in the second book. So it's, in fact,
I've never read any of these books.
They have to fight aliens that, now that I'm thinking about it, remind me a lot about toe-dash monsters. So
interesting.
It's definitely toe-dash.
Interesting.
All right. Next answer from All84001. For surrealist horror, it depends on whether you want straight up disturbing or a fun time. For disturbing, I don't think you can beat the master himself, Mr. David Lynch. He's so good at turning the mundane into the terrifying. And he doesn't ever rely on cheap tricks like jump scares or setting everything in darkness. His horror lives in the daylight. Case in point, the ceiling fan in Laura Palmer's house, or the scene behind the Winkies in Mulholland Drive. It's broad daylight, and it's really just a filthy homeless man, but the image burns into your brain and scares the shit out of you. The literary equivalent of Lynch is Haruki Murakami. He does with words what Lynch does with sounds and images. For fun surreal horror, my pick is Panos Cosmatos' delightful film Mandy. 4 words: motherfucking chainsaw fight. Nick Cage fights a demon biker, and they both have chainsaws. Come on. It's also a commercial for the movie. There's also a commercial in the movie for mac and cheese that has a weird evil green Muppet called the Cheddar Goblin who barfs macaroni all over a family. And of course, just all around insano Cage in top form. In one 5-minute long no cutaway scene, he chugs an entire bottle of whiskey in a t-shirt and tidy whities while screaming incessantly. It's goddamn glorious. Cosmatos' other film, Beyond the Black Rainbow, is also surreal as hell, but definitely not as fun to watch. It's kind of like if the Dharma Initiative films from Lost were a horror movie. Worth a watch, though. Actually, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it does. This is the part where I have to admit that I didn't really like Mandy very much, which is confusing to me because I feel like I'm wrong, but it's just the truth. Because I love Nick Cage. I love crazy Nick Cage. And I thought I would be totally in on this movie, and it just didn't work for me. I don't even remember it enough to give you a clear answer why, but I just remember excitedly going to see this movie and walking out just like, eh. But so many people love it, so I'm not telling them they're wrong. It's weird.
Yeah, maybe just too much somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you, but it didn't work on me.
Okay.
You haven't seen that, have you?
No.
Next, we have The Walking Hard Case, who says, boy, I love this question. There are so many examples that immediately come to mind, so am I just going to list them off, and you guys can include as many or as few as you like? Well, we're going to include them all, damn it.
Damn it.
Harry Potter. 1. Harry moving through the restricted section and finding a book which, when opened, unleashes a terrible, guttural scream, all while Harry is trying to be quiet. 2. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione first encounter Fluffy. While it's more comic than horrifying, it's still very much the latter. After all, how would you react to suddenly being face-to-face with a giant 3-headed dog? Annihilation. Basically the whole movie, but especially the scene with the mutant bear. I think I need to say no more. Requiem for a Dream. Yep. They go on from there, but I think I see. The funny thing is I see a lot of answers here that are other people said as well.
Yeah. It's interesting how, the line between surreal horror and just kind of disturbing horror is not a line, but rather a big zone. Like, for example, they list the Thing lower down here, and I'm like, I mean, I probably wouldn't have called that surreal horror, but I could totally see why you would call that surreal horror. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think my favorite thing they listed actually is Adult Swim's Too Many Cooks, which I don't know if you've ever watched that, Matt.
No.
If not, you need to watch that as soon as we're done recording.
Okay.
It's basically a 90s, late 80s, early 90s sitcom introduction about a family called the Cooks, and then it goes from there.
Okay.
And that's all I'll say.
I like things like that.
It's definitely surreal for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
Shenanigoats says 2 words: Annihilation, Scream Bear.
Which is what Walking Hard Case also said.
And yes, Scream Bear is 1 word.
Annihilation is wonderful. If you ever want to see me get angry on a podcast, go listen to our episode covering Annihilation. Matt couldn't make it to that one, so I was on with Matt's brother and our friend Michael, who hated the movie. And I just got so mad at Michael. I was so angry.
Yeah. Michael's good for bringing out a certain side of Scott. It's quite.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it. Like, I love him. He's great. He's one of my best friends. But man, he can piss me off when talking about art.
You've just known him too long, Scott.
Yeah, that's true.
You've known him far longer than you've known me, and you've known me forever. So
yeah, that's true. Kingy1701A says, Twin Peaks has already been mentioned, but I want to talk about a specific moment. Everything with Bob is terrifying, but the standout is the sequence just after James' song along. The camera is in a fixed point of view, shot showing a sofa and a room beyond. Bob walks through the frame in the background before turning to face us. He then begins to advance on the camera, climbing over the sofa as he goes. What makes it really surreal is the forced perspective, which gives the impression of Bob growing in size as he approaches. The fact that the camera doesn't move makes it feel like he is inescapable, utterly horrific. The only thing that comes close for me is the end of Ringu, where Sadako similarly approaches the camera, only to emerge from the television itself, thus breaking the sense of safety previously afforded to the characters, and by the extension, viewers. You haven't seen Twin Peaks, so I can't talk to you about this, but I love this answer.
All right. Yeah, that sounds creepy. It probably doesn't sound as creepy as it is, because it's the kind of thing that I bet you have to see to really understand.
For sure.
I keep thinking of just the David Lynch, the Guild Navigator in the beginning of Dune, where it's like, that wasn't in the book at all. He just wanted to have a disgusting, creepy monster in the beginning of his movie, and so he did it. Yeah. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Walking Dude 22 says, don't know if I can make the cutoff this week. I've been slacking. Well, you did make the cutoff.
Congratulations.
Oh, this is a good choice though. My choice for surreal horror is the 1990 film Jacob's Ladder. In the movie, a Vietnam veteran is having flashbacks and suffering from the post-traumatic effects of his service. There are plenty of what the fuck moments in the film, but since the movie relies on a twist, I don't want to spoil things. Maybe one of the most spooky moments comes when Jacob oversleeps on the subway and gets off in an abandoned station. Then he sees a man with no face on a passing train. If you haven't seen it, you should. I think that scene falls like really close to the beginning of the movie, by the way. So stay away from the 2019 reboot, though, they say. I didn't know there was one.
I did not know they made a reboot.
I don't want to watch it because the first one, like that's one of those movies that completely blindsided me in terms of how much it stuck with me and how effective it was.
Yeah.
Like I just was expecting a little silly movie. Maybe a couple scares in there, and it's like it just kind of wrung me out. Like it's still it's a good movie, really good movie.
I need to watch it again. It's been too long.
Yeah,
there's so many things I need to watch. Complicated 9519 says, if I thought longer on this, I could have put a couple anime examples instead. So you're welcome. Thank you so much. For surreal horror, I'll have to bring up The Institute by Stephen King. The story itself isn't that scary, but there is a part in the book, as the children try to escape and free everyone who is pretty much imprisoned there, that they end up in the back of the Institute, a place not much different than where the Breakers lived in the Dark Tower series. Now, I don't remember all the details, but there's a part where the children are pretty much brain dead, but still have the touch. They are, I believe, naked, pissing, shitting, and vomiting on themselves. Mumbling words are in this room that just look like a half-assed attempt at a psych ward, and one of them is doing cartwheels. They're just wandering around like zombies, and hearing this on audiobook was very disturbing. I did a bad job explaining this, but I believe Scott read the book and understands what I am talking about. I do. I don't think he did a bad job at all. It's funny. Like you said, I read The Institute and nothing popped into mind. And then I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
Interesting. Cool.
Man, Matt, one day you're going to have to read some modern King because it's really interesting the stuff he's doing. I didn't love The Institute, but
yeah, I sort of vaguely know what the premise of The Institute, and it makes me want to read it actually, just based on the idea of it. All right, next we have Darkbeer Rules says, for me, it's not just a scene, but an entire novel concept. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time takes a pretty standard sci-fi trope, must move Earth people to another planet due to X, but throws it for a totally terrifying loop. In this delightfully twisted take on so many other wonderful stories, our Earth scientist heroes decide to seed another planet with primates who, upon landing, are exposed to a virus which not only speeds up but supercharges their evolution as a species, so that when the rest of Earth's population arrives many decades later, they will have a world to live on that has sentient, evolved species of mankind there already, theoretically welcoming them with open arms. Except that's not exactly what happens. In fact, this is so far from what actually happens, it would be predictable, except it isn't. The premise had the power to be a yawner, but it was executed in a very unexpected way. I love how Darkbeer Rules is avoiding saying what the reveal actually is. And so I guess I'm not going to say it either, but this is one that we covered for book club.
We did
a while back. I really enjoyed this. It's funny. I think that whether or not you were afraid of a certain specific thing will determine how scary you think this idea is.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I don't remember finding this book particularly horrifying. I enjoyed the book quite a bit, but I don't remember finding it horrifying. But I think you're right. If that thing is not your bag, I could see that for sure.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
It's a good book. I still want to read the sequel.
It's really good. It's just a good science fiction book. I mean,
Yeah,
good.
Really fun concepts here. Next, we have Sigma, who says, I'm going to cheat here. I count Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita as a horror for reasons you can probably guess. We see everything through the distorted and distorting lens of Humbert Humbert. Is his name a portmanteau of humble and pervert? As he cycles through prose, multilingual puns, and maskings via French, and even more ludicrous reasons for his crime. The very title is horrible. Lolita is not what Dolores Hayes is called by anyone around her. She was Dottie on the dotted line, as Humbert says in paragraph fucking 1. But Kubrick and the other dickheads did not understand the fact or that Lolita was a blasphemous cognomen, nor do the other people. It's Dolores, not that cancerous name. You read Humbert's labyrinthian justifications throughout, and his thought process is a form of chaos magic where he assigns significance and connections to disconnected things as a way to elevate his monstrosity to something irrational or touching. Gosh, Lolita is certainly horrifying, that's for sure. But it's supposed to be. That's. I think they go on to say, if anyone suspect of the author, he describes Humbert as vain and cruel a wretch, among other things. Yeah, it's a really interesting book, Matt, because I don't know if have you read Lolita?
No, that's one of the many books on my list.
Yeah, the point is actually like, what if we put ourselves in the head of a horrible abuser of a child, right? And watch as he completely justifies everything he's doing.
Right.
And the book it doesn't hold back in that regard, right? Like, it doesn't give you an out and be like, no, clearly the author wants you to hate this man. Like, because he's actually, it's not that you don't hate him, but like, he's very convincing.
Sure.
That's like his whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's horrifying, because he's very good. He's very good at what he does. And this is what actually have caused a lot of people to read this in an unfavoring light to the author, who is seen as justifying this kind of terrible assault. But that's the point.
Yeah, I mean, we here at Doof Media are well familiar with the concept of protagonist goggles, where people will think that the author either endorses the protagonist's actions or indeed that the protagonist's actions are righteous, simply because they're coming out of the protagonist's point of view. No, I really that's one where I'm just like, why haven't I read this? Yeah.
Well, it can be pretty hard to read, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we'll do it for book club sometime. That'll be a well-attended book club.
Oh gosh, that makes me nervous.
Yeah. Me too. All right. Next, from Richard K. My favorite scene of surrealist horror is from the 1990 cult classic movie Nightbreed. It came from the twisted but brilliant mind of Clive Barker. The movie as a whole goes to some crazy places and involves a tribe of monsters that live in a place called Midian, as well as a subplot of a serial killer that is trying to find his tribe. I saw this movie way too young, and it has stuck with me. But the best scenes are the dream sequences and panning shots that show off the creepy-ass creature design. It's like a much more disturbing version of the Mos Eisley Cantina scenes in Star Wars, introducing a bunch of different new alien species. I've rewatched it in the past few years, and it still holds up pretty well as far as disturbing, nightmare-inducing horror films go. Haven't seen that one either.
I haven't seen that. I would like to watch that. Next, we have Steve L., who says, the knife scene with Mr. Krupp and Mr. Vandermeer from Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere book. Just perfect writing that made the scene so explicit, but at the same time funny. The only Neil Gaiman I haven't read, Matt. The only one.
Neverwhere. Yeah, okay. I guess I've heard the name, but no, I haven't read it.
Ania's final scene in the last Hyperion book. Can't spoil, but it's perfect too. There's Steve, like clockwork, coming to make us feel bad about not finishing Hyperion.
Yeah, I almost started reading it and then I didn't. So that's my story.
And then they end with a couple King examples. They actually gave more examples than this, Matt, but I cut the ones that are spoilers for you. So Eddie shooting Shardik, they say, and the ending fight with the Wolves of the Kala. Interesting. I guess there is some that final fight with the wolves is kind of surreal in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. It's funny. It doesn't feel horrifying to me, but it is surreal because it's Doctor Doom with snitches and cool. And then the final answer this week from Christopher L. Funny. I was going to make a comment about this and a question just led into it, and I'll cheat a little. The experiences of Jack and Richard at the Thayer School and Jake's time in the mine trap felt eerily similar. Both preyed on the individual's own fears, anxieties, and insecurities, and were very specific. Pennywise. Maybe Thayer was just a mind trap? Non-cheating answer. I guess I would recommend checking out a newer book called The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek. It feels very similar to the Sunlight School, a reformatory school run by a religious cult leader and a noble cause, yet his actions are crazy and awful. Takes a lot of twists and turns. And for funsies, it was written by two YouTubers, Rhett McLaughlin and Link Neal. A great, fun, and quick little read.
Interesting.
Awesome.
I like this idea of Thayer being a mind trap.
Yeah. I mean, if it feels like it.
Yeah. It goes like, it could be a fun headcanon way to explain exactly what's happening at the school, which we've kind of moved on from, right? And we never got a real solid explanation of exactly why any of the stuff was happening.
I mean, we don't really know what a mind trap is, so sure.
It's a machine that traps your mind.
Yeah. Whatever. All right. So next week's discussion question is, what's your favorite train?
So we've seen a couple trains over the course of this podcast. We of course have Blaine the Mono, and then we have the little shitty train from the Blasted Lands in the Talisman. And we thought it'd be fun to say, like, hey, there's a lot of trains in stories. Trains are in stories all the time. So what's your favorite train?
Yeah. Doesn't have to be a living train. It can be any train.
Should we say you can't answer Blaine the Mono? Because I feel like everyone's going to say Blaine.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, I would as well.
I mean, like, it's boring if it's just 100 people saying Blaine. So
yeah,
I guess probably works best to say, don't say Blaine.
Don't say Blaine. And this will be a great test for people who answer the question before listening to the podcast, because you're going to say Blaine and everyone will call you out, and it'd be so embarrassing. Oh my God, you're going to be so embarrassed.
We know your favorite is Blaine. It's fine. Just give us your second favorite.
Think of a non-Blaine train.
Maybe the question should be, what's your second favorite train?
Yeah, there you go. What's your second favorite train? I like it. So let us know. There's plenty of trains. There's plenty of examples. Go crazy with it. Have some fun. That's what this whole discussion question part is supposed to be about, right?
Allegedly.
So that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we continue with our time with Jack and Richard and whatever they're going to get up to now that they've made it to, I guess, maybe they're in California. We don't actually know. But they are continuing their sprint towards the end of the Talisman. We will be reading and discussing chapters 37 through 40. So 4 more chapters. Read those and join us right here next week.
It would be funny if they popped out of the territories and they were just in like Western Illinois.
That would suck.
Yeah. Anyway, remember you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit at r/doofmedia is a great place to answer the discussion question, see what else we're doing over on the Doof Network, what other shows we're covering on the Doofcast, for example, and just hang out with other cool folks.
I think we're doing Galaxy Quest this week, which is the best Star Trek film. So you should come listen to us talk about that on the Doofcast.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers or the Doofcast, you should do that. Pull out your phone right now. Go to whatever podcatcher you use, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and hit that subscribe button. And if you've already subscribed, just don't hit it again because that might unsubscribe you.
Just figure out a way to subscribe twice.
Yeah, do it. Like pull out your burner phone, or you're cheating on your spouse phone.
Oh God. Just find your significant other's phone. And just subscribe on that phone.
Yeah, that's better than what I said.
Jesus Christ, God. Anyway, if you like any of our shows, despite Scott's comments, and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks to new patron Becky D this month. Welcome. We hope you enjoy all of those bonus features, including all of those discussions of Stephen King adaptations over on the podcast feed.
Yeah, 1408. It's live right now. Go listen to it. We talked about the movie for about an hour, and we had a good time doing it.
Yeah.
Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. There are tons of ways of helping us out. And the best way will always be to share the podcast and to leave us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Mamapta1, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Made me read all the books again. I started listening during my morning walk, and before I know it, I was reading all the books again and looking forward to discussions in this podcast." That is so nice to hear, and good for you for going on morning walks. Maybe by the end of the show, you'll have walked a marathon because we talk a lot.
Yeah, that's actually, you honestly probably would have walked more than a marathon. That's
totally realistic. Literally, when I ran my marathon, I ran it in 4 hours, which is, Matt, it's less than 2 episodes of our podcast.
Oh my God. Yeah, you could go on a cross-country trip with our podcast and get through a tenth of it.
Just Forrest Gump it. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you so much for that kind review, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to do those. Seriously, we say this every week, but it remains true. It really does help us out. Please keep them coming. And that is going to do it for us this week. We did not meet our goal of making an episode under 2 hours, but maybe I'll cut some stuff strategically like this, where I'm saying right here, and we could do it.
Yeah. There's the pointless meandering that's not really going anywhere that we're doing right now. Yeah.
Look, I'm tired. Okay. And at some point I crossed my legs and leaned back in my chair, and that's really when the episode got wild.
Yeah, that's always a sign.
All right, folks, that's going to do it. We will see you right back here next week for more Talisman, long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.